In this Elden Ring video, I'm going to be showing you my Vanquisher build, which is pretty much an all-game build. You can use it from very early on in the game. I wouldn't say from the very beginning of the game, but you can use it fairly early on, and it does fantastic. And for this build, I'm going to be using the Dragon Halberd weapon. This is a weapon that we showcased in our Halberds video a very long time ago. One that I've been meaning to make a build with for some time because I find it very, very interesting. It's a very unique weapon, and it's just fun to play with. And you can get this weapon pretty early on, which is why I said that it's kind of an all-game build, but not quite. You get it from the Dragonkin Soldier boss in Shifra River, which is not that far. You can literally beeline it, go down there and beat it if you are competent enough. You can play almost the entire game with it, but if you're a beginner player or a normal player that doesn't feel as competent, it might take you a little while to get this build off the ground because you might have to like level up or some other weapon or your stats or something, or have some other strategy until you acquire this weapon and then sort of, you know, go for this weapon. So talking about what makes the Dragon Halberd so special, it actually has an Ash of War spinning slash that is the same, more or less, as other spinning slash Ashes of War in the game, but functions a little bit differently. It has a higher FP cost, a significantly higher FP cost, I should say. But what it does do is it buffs your weapon with Ice Lightning, increasing your attack rating with lightning damage by 160. So it not only, does damage as a weapon skill, but it also buffs your damage. And if you didn't know, Ice Lightning is not the same as Lightning, and Ice Lightning does Frostbite buildup. So while your weapon is buffed with Ice Lightning, you're not only going to get the extra damage from Lightning, but you're also going to do Frostbite buildup on each attack, allowing you to trigger Frostbite on, like hard-to-kill enemies and bosses, which is, predominantly what you're going to use this on. However, one usage of Spinning Slash will buff your weapon. So you might just buff your weapon periodically for 17 FP, but the follow-up, L2 press is only 11 FP. So keep in mind that it's more cost-efficient to use it twice in a row if you're, trying to go for big damage on like a hard-to-kill enemy or boss. But out on the landscape, where you may just need to buff your weapon for some extra damage, using it once might be the way to go. And this weapon also has pretty good attack rating in my opinion. While two-handing it at 55 strength and 45 dexterity, you have 730 attack rating, which is a pretty good attack rating for this. And this is all physical damage, which is really nice, because if you use something like Exalted Flesh, you're going to boost your damage, or if you happen to have Flame Grant Me Strength, like if you, decide to put a few points into Faith and use Flame Grant Me Strength, it's going to buff all that damage, and that's going to, really, really boost the damage that you deal. And also keep in mind, that's the attack rating before you buff your weapon with Ice Lightning, and then you gain another 160 lightning damage on top of that for its duration. So you're talking about like 890 attack rating or something like that, which is really, really high for a weapon that weighs 10. That's like a really high attack rating. The weapon also has decent guard boost when it's fully upgraded at 51. Like if you wanted to do block counters, you could actually have like a decent block counter build. I find that I don't really need it. But another thing that I really love about this weapon is that its R1 press does thrusts. So you're able to take advantage of the Spear Talisman to further increase your counter damage. So that's really nice on a halberd. You can either, mix up your attacks to get some slashing attacks that do slashing damage, or you can poke with the halberd and do some pierce or thrust damage as well. So you can mix up your damage types with this weapon, which is really great. And the other thing is the requirements for this weapon are really low. They're 22 strength and 10 dexterity. So if you had 16 strength, you could two-hand this weapon, which is what we're doing in this build. So you can use this build from very, very early on in the game. So the armor that I'm using for this build is the Gelmir Knight set. I just kind of went with it for aesthetics. It doesn't really matter what armor you're using as long as you have more than 51 poise. The idea here is that when you're using your Spinning Slash, you're going to poise through some damage on bosses and continue to use it. So you want to have decent poise with this build. You can use any armor combination you want. This is kind of what I went with for fashion, kind of like mixing up my armor with my builds, but you can use whatever you want. For talismans for this build, we have Warrior Jar Shard or Shard of Alexander, whichever you want to use, depending if you're at the beginning of the game or your late game or playing a new game plus, etc. This is going to boost the damage of Spinning Slash, which is nice. We also have Ritual Sword Talisman, which just boosts our damage in general when we're at full health. This will usually be to get like your first rotation of Spinning Slash off on a boss fight. You'll usually trade, and then you'll lose that buff, but you'll do substantial damage for those first few hits. And also when you're out on the landscape, you tend not to get hit with this weapon because you can run and poke with it, or poke from good range, or use Spinning Slash. So, and because you deal such high damage, you usually kill things quickly, and you don't, take damage from them. So I find it works really well. And another good one is Dragon Crest Great Shield for boss fights where you're going to trade, but it's not so good out on the landscape. I would suggest swapping this out for something that helps with FP cost, for instance, like Carrion Filigree Crest or something like that, that's going to help with the FP cost management of using Spinning Slash regularly. And then the other one, as I mentioned, is the Spear Talisman. This increases your counter damage, which is your thrust or pierce damage that you do to an enemy that's mid-attack. It's actually attacking toward you. And because you can do thrust with your pokes, this is a good way to boost your damage, and this can happen quite frequently. And, can help you to one-shot or two-shot enemies that are, out on the landscape without taking damage. And again, what's really nice about the Spear Talisman is it only boosts physical damage for counter damage, and since the weapon does all physical damage except for that ice lightning on top, it's going to affect most of the damage this weapon does. So attribute-wise for this build in New Game Plus, I have 50 Vigor, 30 Mind, 25 Endurance, 55 Strength, 45 Dexterity, and basically you don't need any Intelligence, Faith, or Arcane. You could make a case for some Faith in order to be able to use Flame Grant Me Strength for tough-to-kill enemies and bosses, in which case you would want 15 Faith, and then maybe at some point take that up to 25 to use Golden Vow as well. But you really don't need it in this build, and it's not a build that you really need to buff with often, as you kind of accidentally buff yourself or, inadvertently do it while using Spinning Slash anyway, and so you don't really need to focus on, rebuffing yourself much. And Vigor is just there in order to trade damage and not die. You're not using a shield. You are kind of exposed. You will get hit when you're first learning this build, and sometimes, and Vigor is just there to help you survive. Mind is there in order to let you use Spinning Slash more effectively when you're at, New Game Plus or the end of your first playthrough. That way you can pull out things like Carrion Filigree Crest from this build. If you're talking early game, Carrion Filigree Crest or something that reduces or gives you FP, like Assassin's Cerulean Dagger or something like that, is really good to have because, it'll make it so you can use your Spinning Slash more at will, but as you approach higher and higher mind values, you don't need those anymore, and that allows you to pull that out and replace it with something else that's more beneficial to your build. Endurance-wise, this build is very stamina-hungry. I find that Spinning Slash consumes just a lot of stamina, and I have 25 Endurance here, which is enough to medium roll with my setup and, be able to allocate points elsewhere. And if you're in your first playthrough, you're not a New Game Plus, and you're just starting out, I recommend not focusing too much on Endurance. But as you get into NG Plus, increasing your Endurance or taking something that increases your stamina is very beneficial, because you sometimes won't be able to use Spinning Slash because you run out of stamina. And then I found the sweet spot for this weapon at about 55 Strength and 45 Dexterity, but you'll take these both up to 80 eventually in New Game Plus and beyond to further increase your damage. The weapon scales pretty well up to 80 in both stats. Scales a little bit better with Strength and Dexterity, which is why we're a little bit skewed that way. But otherwise, you're going to get a lot of damage out of this, even going up to 80. So it's a good weapon for New Game Plus and maybe even New Game Plus 2. As far as the Flask of Wonders Physique goes, there's a few ways you can go here. You can add Strength and Dexterity to it to further boost your damage. You can do Stamina Recovery in order to give you stamina back quickly, because again, this is a very stamina hog build. You can use the Lead and Hard tier to give you some poise at the very, very beginning of a boss fight, so that you can spam Spinning Slash and just poise through attacks for a few seconds, which is nice depending on which boss you're facing. And you can even use the Opaline Bubble tier in order to protect yourself significantly from the first hit you take, which is great in a boss fight because you're going to be spamming Spinning Slash early on in order to buff yourself anyway. So kind of negating most of the damage of one hit can be nice. Now, as far as your Great Rune for this build, Godric's is not a terrible one early on in the game because you do need 5 stats for this build. So, and especially if you want to go the Faith route and then add Flame Grant Me Strength, that would be 6 stats. So if you kind of plan to go that route, I think Godric's is a better choice. But if you're not planning on adding any Faith to this build, and you're just playing it kind of as is the way I'm playing, I think Radahn's is a better choice here because you gain HP, which is nice. You gain more stamina, and as I mentioned, this is a stamina-hungry build, and you gain more FP in order to use Spinning Slash more easily. So Radahn's, in my opinion, is the better of the two, unless perhaps you're maybe going the Faith route. So that wraps up the Vanquisher build. I hope you guys enjoyed it. This is a pretty straightforward build. It has a very interesting Ash of War that's kind of a very familiar Ash of War in Spinning Slash, but with the Ice Lightning is really nice. There isn't too many weapons with Ice Lightning in this game, and I really kind of enjoy that aspect. Being able to build up Frostbite on bosses can help kill them faster by ripping off chunks of their health and making them take more damage, so it's really nice to have, and it's just kind of a cool weapon overall. Stay tuned for more Elden Ring content. I am working on the next weapons video, which I believe is going to be hammers, and I will probably have another Elden Ring build next week. If there are other builds you guys want to see or other Elden Ring content you want to see, let me know in the comments below.